Hi there, I'm Lena Anani, and you're listening to She Wrote a Book, where I interview amazing women from all over the world who also happen to be published authors. I created this show to educate, entertain, and inspire you to be the voice you want to hear in the world. Now let's get started.
You are listening to episode number 122 of She Wrote a Book, and today I'm interviewing Virginia Simpson, author of the book The Space Between, a memoir of mother-daughter love at the end of life. After a threatening illness, Dr. Virginia Simpson moves her mother into her home and for the next 6 years cares for her. The Space Between is both her personal story and the universal story about caregiving and the power of love to heal. Dr. Virginia Simpson is a bereavement care specialist and executive counseling director for hundreds of funeral homes in the U.S. and Canada. She is also the founder of the Mourning Star Center for grieving children and their families. Again, her book is called The Space Between, a memoir of mother-daughter love at the end of life. You can find the link to purchase her book in our show notes for this episode at SheWroteABook.com/122. So, Virginia, it's such a pleasure to have you here as a guest today. My first question for you is this: what inspired you to write and publish this book?
Well, I was participating in an online writing group led by a New York Times best-selling author, and each week we had to produce pages. And once I began to write about my mother, I found our story took hold of me and didn't want to let go until I'd written the last page. And because of my work in the field of death, dying, and bereavement, I knew I wanted The Space Between to go beyond simply being my story. I wanted it to help others.
And what was the approach that you took in writing your story that you felt would help your readers?
I made sure to put on the page such things as the necessary conversations you have to have with a loved one before they get sick, issues of dealing with hospice, with medical care, with what goes on near the end of life, a caregiver burnout, and also relationships, how sometimes you get in a difficult relationship and the importance of staying with it so that you have an opportunity to work things through, so that if you are lucky, you can be like my mother and I, because by the time she died, there were no spaces between us. There was only love.
That's so beautiful. And for the benefit of our listeners, how do you define the space between? What does that mean?
Well, there's a lot of spaces between. There's the space between the moment you inhale and exhale your last breath, and the spaces that come between people. Our histories can come between us, mothers and daughters. Anybody who's had a mother knows it's a complex relationship. And so our histories could come between us. The day-to-day things that were going on could come between us. And we just learned to communicate with each other so that we didn't have anything that was between us anymore, except love.
I love that. So the space between would it be like the untold or the unspoken concerns, thoughts, feelings? Is that
anything that keeps people apart? Anything.
Okay, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so why do you think it's so valuable to clear that space?
If you haven't, when a person dies, you can end up feeling guilty. I found this with so many people I've worked with, and it also happened to me because my dad died when I was a little girl, and our last conversation was an argument, and I never got to say, I love you. He was just gone. So I knew it was important to do everything that I could so that when my mother died, the last words between us would be, I love you. And I wouldn't have to feel guilty about what I hadn't said or maybe what I had said that I shouldn't have said, that we would have cleared everything. I've seen just too many people racked with tremendous guilt for what they did or didn't do. And I didn't want that to happen with us.
This is such a serious, sensitive subject, right? So I'm almost speechless on my end. I feel like even though I felt like I was prepared coming into this, but because as you're talking, I'm thinking about the relationship with my mother,
mm-hmm.
right? And I guess I wonder, like, how at what point should at what point are your readers picking up your book? I guess that's the question. Is are your readers people who have a healthy relationship with their loved ones, who are and both are perfectly healthy, or are they people who maybe have a relative who is about to cross over?
I would say both. My youngest reader so far, 26 years old, both parents alive and healthy, and she found it really eye-opening about how you're always somebody's child no matter how old you are, and that the relationship things are always there. And so for her that was helpful. I've heard from people, their parents aren't sick, but they have some problems with them, and they're saying, I haven't talked to my mother or my father in a while. Now I realize I need to give them a call, and I want to work harder on our relationship. And then I've also heard from readers who've had their mothers die or a parent die, and it just touched their hearts. It spoke to them about things that they had gone through, and it meant a lot to them. And one thing that was wonderful is a therapist told me one of her clients said that she felt the book spoke her life to her, and so she loved it. And so I feel it has the power to heal a lot of relationships.
That's incredible. That's such a it's a topic that you wouldn't think or for me, let me say this, I wouldn't have thought that this was a book that I could pick up and heal living relationships, right? There's so much value in that.
I think there can be a lot of healing, but it is my story. It's a memoir. It's not a self-help book. Mm-hmm. But I put everything on the page. I didn't sugarcoat my mom and I. We were not easy women. We were... Mm-hmm. As with all mothers and daughters, it's the things about us that are similar that cause so many problems. Mm-hmm. And so we just had to work through it, and we did. And the beauty of writing the book was I got to hang out with my mother and slow down time, and I got to know her in ways that I never had known her before. And I grew in my appreciation for who she was. And I can only hope that as I go through life, I can have as much courage as she did. In fact, if I had 1/10 of her courage, I'd be doing really well.
That's wonderful. That's so sweet. So were you, you're a bereavement care specialist. Were you in that role while you were writing this book?
While I was writing, while I was writing the book, yes. And when I was living with my mother, I was running a nonprofit center that provided free support for grieving children and their families. So I've been doing this work for 31 years, and I do continue to do the work, and I learned so much from my clients, and that also helped me to know what needed to be down on the page, what people needed to see, and what might be able to help them. This is a huge thing that's happening with the aging of the baby boomers. There's going to be a lot of people who are going to find themselves in the caregiving role. But beyond the caregiving role, I think it's never too soon to learn everything you can about healing relationships with the people we love.
And what would you tell someone who didn't have the opportunity to heal that space between a loved one who's already crossed over?
Well, you have to forgive yourself because we are only human. You really are only human. And even knowing what I knew about death and the after of everything, I still struggled. So you have to forgive yourself. We're only human, and we can't be perfect. And we have to know that really the people we love, they're gone. They've forgiven us. And the best we can do is just love a little better as we keep going along in life. Learn from what we didn't do and make things better as we go forward. Be more loving to the people that are in our lives now. That's the best tribute you can pay to somebody who's died, is to live better because you knew them.
You're amazing, Virginia. I love your responses. I'm really resonating with this. This is great.
Thank you.
My last question for you is, what do you love most about being an author?
Things like this where I get to talk about it, the part where I hear from people that the book has made a difference. That I love. And the process of writing is just so fascinating. What you learn on the page about the events of your own life when you do memoir, it's just fascinating experience to see what's really there, what's underneath those days that we lived. It's just an incredible opportunity and a real gift. But the best part is connecting with people and hearing from people telling me it made a difference.
Wonderful. Well, Virginia, thank you so much for being our special guest today. We will have a link to your book in the show notes for this episode, and our listeners can find that at SheWroteABook.com/122 to learn more about her author and her inspiring book. Thanks again, Virginia.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to She Wrote a Book. If you enjoyed this episode, then subscribe now so you can automatically get access to all new episodes, and feel free to share your inspired thoughts with us in the comments too. I'd love to hear from you. Until then, may you always feel good and make magic.